They say the deepest scars aren't left by enemies, but by the hands we once held for comfort. Imagine taking everything you've ever built, your home, your life savings, your very peace, and handing it over just to keep someone else from drowning. But instead of gratitude, you're handed a cold envelope and a door slammed in your face. This isn't a movie plot. It's the raw, bleeding reality of souls crushed by the greed of their own blood. Today, we step behind the closed doors of family to witness a chess game where one side played with pure devotion, while the other played with a heart full of ice. But before we go further, let us ask ourselves something uncomfortable. Why do we trust so completely? Why do we hand over our homes, our savings, our hearts to people simply because they share our blood or our name? Perhaps because we are taught from childhood that family does not betray. That the people who sat at your dining table, who celebrated your birthdays, who cried at your losses, those people could never be your enemy. And it is precisely this belief that becomes the sharpest weapon in the hands of those who choose to exploit it. The cruelest betrayals in this world are not committed by strangers. They are committed by the people who know exactly where your heart is most open and most unguarded. Harold was a simple man from Clarksville, Georgia. He worked for 30 years in the county's public works department. He was not a wealthy man, but he was a proud one. Every dollar in his bank account had been earned with honest sweat. His home was not just a building, it carried the breath of his wife Ruth within its walls. Ruth had planted roses in the front yard. She had chosen the color of every room. She had filled that house with warmth that no amount of money could ever recreate. After Ruth's passing, that house became a museum for Harold, where every corner reminded him of her. The creak of the third stair. The way sunlight hit the kitchen window at 7 in the morning. The faint smell of her perfume that somehow still lingered in the bedroom closet. But everything changed one Thursday evening. His phone rang. On the other end, his niece Danielle was crying. Danielle was like the daughter he never had. He had attended her school plays, helped pay for her college, danced at her wedding. She told him her catering business was sinking and the bank would take everything. Harold's heart melted. He did not stop to ask questions. He did not consult a lawyer. He did not even sleep on it. He made a decision that perhaps no sensible person would ever make. He sold the very home where he had shared every joy with Ruth. He told himself he was doing what Ruth would have wanted. He told himself that family comes first. He was wrong, but not because his values were wrong. He was wrong because Danielle had already decided to use those values against him. Harold sold his house for $340,000 and transferred $280,000 of it into Danielle's account. He believed he would now live peacefully with Danielle in her home. He imagined quiet evenings on her porch, family dinners, the comfort of not being alone in his old age. But the foundation of betrayal had already been laid long before that phone call ever came. Just 2 weeks later, Danielle handed him an envelope. Inside that envelope were not words of gratitude, not a repayment plan, not even an apology. There was only a list of cheap apartments where Harold was expected to find himself a place to stay. Harold stood in the driveway, a cold wind blowing, and watched as his name had already been erased from the mailbox and replaced with Danielle's. She told him plainly that the money had gone into the business and she could not return it. In that moment, Harold felt something break inside him, not just his heart, but his understanding of the world. He realized that the person he had treated as a daughter was nothing but an actress who had rehearsed her tears very carefully. But Harold was not alone. In a small town in Tennessee lived a retired teacher named Gerald. Gerald had spent his whole life believing in the goodness of people. He had taught English literature for 35 years. He had read his students' poetry about love and loyalty and the human spirit. He had believed every word of it. Gerald had a 9-year-old granddaughter named Lily. The world believed Lily could not speak. Doctors had labeled it selective mutism. People treated her like furniture, as though she simply was not there. At family gatherings, relatives spoke over her head as though she were invisible. Gerald's daughter-in-law Renee considered her an embarrassment, something to be hidden away or explained away to guests. But Lily was silent, not weak. She was watching everything and understanding everything. She had learned very early that the adults around her were not safe. So she had chosen silence as her shield. When Lily's parents left her with Gerald for 10 days and traveled to Europe, Lily did something that shook Gerald's world. She quietly picked up her whiteboard and wrote 4 words in front of him: "We need to talk." Gerald later said that those 4 words were the most powerful sentence he had ever read in his life, and he had read thousands of books. Lily told Gerald that her mother Renee was stealing from his bank account. That 9-year-old girl showed Gerald a file hidden under her bed. Inside it were legal documents, a power of attorney, forged and prepared in secret. Gerald understood that his own son and daughter-in-law were preparing to have him declared mentally incompetent so they could seize his property and his savings. The most painful part was that this theft had begun just 11 days after Gerald's wife Carol's funeral. While Gerald was drowning in grief, while he could barely get out of bed in the morning, while he was still buying flowers for a grave, his daughter-in-law was emptying his bank accounts with calculated precision. Lily had carried this truth inside her chest for 3 months. 3 months of silence. 3 months of watching. 3 months of waiting for someone to finally be worthy of her trust. Betrayal is not always about money. Sometimes it is about power and control, about slowly dismantling a person from the inside until they no longer recognize themselves. Consider the story of a retired family court judge from Ohio. This judge had spent 31 years on the bench hearing domestic violence cases. He had seen manipulation in every form. He had sent abusers to prison. He believed he could recognize every kind of evil. He was wrong. His son-in-law, who appeared perfectly polished and well-mannered in public, who charmed every person he met, who gave firm handshakes and warm smiles, this man was quietly breaking down the judge's own daughter behind closed doors. He was not hitting her. He was doing something far more insidious. He was erasing her. He was cutting her off from her friends one by one. He was making her doubt her own memory, her own judgment, her own worth. By the time the judge began to notice, his daughter had already forgotten who she used to be. One afternoon last July, while the whole family was having a backyard barbecue, the judge watched with his own eyes as his son-in-law shoved his daughter so hard she fell into a chair. The table went quiet for half a second. Then everyone pretended it had not happened. The most shocking part was that the son-in-law's mother, rather than stopping her own son, turned to the daughter and told her she should be more careful next time. As though she had walked into the shove herself. As though she had asked for it. The judge did not create a scene at that moment. He did what an experienced player of the law does. He observed, he documented, and he planned. He picked up his phone and made a quiet call to a retired detective friend. Over the next 3 weeks, he built a case so airtight that his son-in-law had no room to maneuver. He spoke with his daughter every day, gently, patiently, carefully rebuilding the trust that her husband had spent months destroying. He helped her realize that what had happened to her had a name. That it was not her fault. That she was not crazy. That the person who was supposed to protect her had instead chosen to become her greatest threat. The judge's pain was immense, not because of the son-in-law, but because he realized he had been late. He had delivered justice to strangers for 30 years. He had protected people he had never met. But he had missed the signs in his own home, at his own table, in the eyes of his own daughter. That is the cruelest irony of betrayal. It is always hiding in plain sight, dressed in the clothes of someone you love. But here is what all 3 of these stories ultimately teach us. Harold filed a case against Danielle. In court it was proven that Danielle had spent Harold's money not on any business, but on a trip to Cancun, expensive furniture, and designer clothes. Judge Francis Whitmore ordered Danielle to repay every penny and recommended that criminal fraud charges be filed against her. Harold did not recover everything. He never got Ruth's house back. He never got back the 2 weeks of humiliation he endured standing in that driveway. But he recovered something more important, his dignity. Today he drinks tea from Ruth's old brass mug in a small but honest apartment, and he has learned that some losses, as devastating as they are, strip away everything false and leave you with only what is real. In Tennessee, Gerald worked with his lawyer friend Paul to expose Renee's conspiracy completely. When Renee realized the walls were closing in, she had no escape. Gerald's son Daniel's marriage fell apart. But Gerald saved his granddaughter. And the greatest miracle of all came one quiet evening on the porch. Lily spoke. She said her grandfather's name out loud for the very first time. Gerald wept. He understood in that moment that Lily had not been silent because she could not speak. She had been silent because no one had ever made her feel that her words were worth hearing. He had changed that. And in doing so, she had saved him right back. The judge's daughter left her husband and came home. She slept for 2 days straight when she arrived, the deep, exhausted sleep of someone who has finally put down a weight they had been carrying alone for far too long. The judge sat outside her door and did not say a word. He just made sure she knew he was there. That is sometimes all a person needs. Not answers, not solutions, just the knowledge that someone is on the other side of the door and is not going anywhere. These 3 stories are not unusual. They are happening right now, in cities and towns and villages all over the world. Behind closed doors, behind polished smiles, behind family photographs posted on social media, there are people being slowly drained of everything they have. Their money, their confidence, their sense of reality, their will to fight back. And the reason so many of them stay silent is the same reason Lily stayed silent for 3 months. Because they are not sure anyone will believe them. Because the person hurting them is also the person everyone else admires. Because speaking up means blowing up the life they have built, and they are not sure what will be left on the other side. But here is what Harold and Gerald and that judge all learned, in their own painful ways. Silence protects the wrong person. Every day you stay quiet, the person exploiting you grows bolder. Every day you convince yourself it is not that bad, they take a little more. The foundation of every betrayal is the assumption that you will never speak. Prove them wrong. Because the moment you speak, the moment you say out loud what has been done to you, the entire architecture of their deception begins to crack. It cannot survive the light. It never could. If something like this is happening to you, if you feel someone is taking advantage of your love, your trust, your silence, remember this: you are not alone, and you are not powerless. The road back is hard. It is uncomfortable and frightening, and sometimes it costs you relationships you thought would last forever. But on the other side of that road is something worth every step of the journey. Your life. Your real life. The one that belongs entirely to you. Trust is the most precious thing a human being can offer another person. Do not waste it on those who see it only as an opportunity. And if someone has already wasted yours, take it back. It still belongs to you.